Hey there! Before we jump in, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment to let me know what you think. Alright, let's get started. Jonah Mercer had never imagined his wedding night would smell like dust, sweat, and fear. The small ranch house outside Cottonwood Ridge, Wyoming territory, creaked in the night wind, its boards popping like nervous joints as he stood alone in the narrow hallway, staring at the closed bedroom door. The lantern in his hand threw a weak yellow glow across the floor, and beyond the thin pine planks, he could hear her crying. It wasn't loud. It wasn't panicked. It was restrained, measured, the kind of crying that came from somewhere deeper than fear. That was what unsettled him most. If she had been afraid of him, he thought he could have understood that. After all, they were strangers joined by circumstance, not love. But this sounded like grief, or memory, or something that had waited a long time to be let loose. He shifted his weight, boots scuffing softly against the floor. "Mary," he said quietly, unsure whether speaking her name would make things better or worse. "You all right in there?" The crying stopped so abruptly it felt like a door slamming shut inside his chest. Silence stretched, heavy and listening. Then he heard movement. Not footsteps exactly. Something being dragged. Wood against wood. Slow. Deliberate. Jonah's fingers tightened around the lantern handle. He told himself it was just nerves, just a woman rearranging a room she wasn't yet comfortable sharing. Still, he didn't move closer. He didn't touch the knob. He waited, because something told him waiting was safer than acting. Earlier that day, under a sky washed pale by heat, Jonah had stood at the front of Cottonwood Ridge's small clapboard church and watched Mary Caldwell walk toward him down the aisle. She wore a simple cream dress with long sleeves, her dark hair pinned neatly back, her face calm in a way that seemed practiced. Folks whispered as she passed. They always did when Mary Caldwell was involved. She had come to town 6 months earlier with her uncle, Samuel Caldwell, a man with money, cattle, and influence that stretched further than anyone cared to admit. Mary had been polite, distant, and observant, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. Jonah remembered how her eyes had lifted to his just before the vows, searching his face as if trying to confirm something she already suspected. When he took her hand, it was cold, but she didn't pull away. Jonah hadn't married for love. He'd married because the land his father had died on was slipping through his fingers like dry soil. The drought had been merciless, the cattle dying one by one, the bank growing impatient. Samuel Caldwell's offer had been simple enough: marry my niece, and I'll clear your debts, restock your herd, and see that your ranch survives. Jonah had hated himself for how quickly he'd considered it. He hated himself more for how quickly he'd agreed. But when he met Mary, really met her, something complicated had settled in his chest. She wasn't loud or demanding. She didn't look at him like a man she had bought or been sold to. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she looked at him like someone hoping for something she didn't dare name. Now, on the other side of that locked door, Jonah leaned his shoulder against the wall and let out a slow breath. The house was quiet again, but not empty. He could feel her presence like a held breath. After a long moment, he heard her voice, soft and steady. "I'm sorry," she said through the door. "I just need tonight. Please." Jonah closed his eyes. He thought of reaching for the handle, thought of telling her that she didn't owe him anything, that he wasn't going to force himself into her space just because a preacher had said some words. Instead, he nodded to the door like she could see him. "All right," he said. "I'll be right here." He spent the night in the kitchen chair, boots still on, hat resting in his lap. The crying came and went in waves. Sometimes it faded into quiet murmurs he couldn't make out. Once, near midnight, he heard what sounded like whispering, though he was certain no one else was in the house. Another time, the bed creaked sharply, followed by a dull thud, as if something heavy had been set down on the floor. Each sound tightened the knot in his chest. He wondered what kind of past could make a woman lock herself away on her wedding night, not out of fear of her husband, but fear of the night itself. By morning, the sky was just beginning to lighten when the lock finally turned. Jonah straightened so fast the chair legs scraped loudly against the floor. The door opened slowly, and Mary stepped out. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but her back was straight. She looked older somehow, as if the night had taken something from her. "You should sleep," she said gently. "You didn't rest at all." Jonah stared at her, searching her face for answers he didn't yet know how to ask. "Mary," he said, his voice hoarse. "What's going on?" She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked past him, toward the window that faced the hills beyond the ranch. "Not today," she said. "But I'll tell you. I promise." In the days that followed, they settled into an uneasy rhythm. Mary cooked, cleaned, tended the small garden behind the house. Jonah worked the land, repaired fences, began preparing for the new cattle Samuel had promised. From the outside, they looked like any other newlywed couple trying to make a go of it. But there was a careful distance between them, a politeness that felt like a fragile truce. At night, Mary slept in the bed, and Jonah took the couch or the chair. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he would hear her crying again, softer now, as if she were trying to swallow it before it escaped. Each time, his chest ached with the urge to comfort her, but something in her posture during the day, in the way she held herself like a door barred from the inside, told him not to push. Despite that distance, something gentle began to grow between them. It started small. Shared meals eaten in companionable silence. A smile when Jonah brought her wildflowers from the creek. The way Mary laughed once, unexpectedly, when Jonah told a self-deprecating story about his first attempt at breaking a horse. The sound of that laugh stayed with him longer than he liked to admit. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the plains, Mary rested her hand briefly on his arm while pointing out a hawk circling overhead. The touch was light, almost accidental, but Jonah felt it all the same, a spark of warmth that lingered long after she pulled away. The town of Cottonwood Ridge noticed, of course. They always did. Mrs. Eliza Harper, who ran the general store, watched Mary carefully when she came in for supplies, her eyes narrowing with something like recognition. Sheriff Thomas Hale tipped his hat politely but studied Jonah longer than necessary. At the saloon, men lowered their voices when Jonah entered, conversations shifting away from certain topics. One night, Thomas Reed, the saloon owner, leaned across the bar and said quietly, "You married into something heavy, son." Jonah stiffened. "What do you mean?" Reed shook his head. "Just be careful. Caldwell don't bring trouble to town unless it's already been following him." Mary grew tense whenever they passed the Old North Cemetery, a stretch of land marked by crooked wooden crosses and sunken graves. Once, when Jonah suggested clearing brush near the edge of it to expand grazing space, she went very still. "Please don't," she said. "That ground should be left alone." Jonah studied her face, saw something like fear flicker there before she smoothed it away. He nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll leave it." That night, she thanked him quietly, her fingers brushing his hand as she passed. "You don't ask many questions," she said. Jonah shrugged. "When you're ready, you'll tell me." The second locked night came without warning. Jonah returned late from town, the moon already high, to find the bedroom door closed and locked again. The crying began almost as soon as he set the lantern down. This time, it was different. Angrier. Sharper. He heard her speaking, her words urgent, pleading, though he couldn't make them out. Then came the scraping sound again, followed by a hollow knock from inside the room. 3 knocks. Evenly spaced. Jonah stood frozen. "Mary," he called. No answer. The knocks came again, slower this time. Something in his gut twisted. He pressed his palm flat against the door. "Whatever it is," he said softly, "you don't have to face it alone." The sounds stopped. Silence settled, thick and watchful. When morning came, Mary emerged looking calmer than she had any right to after such a night. She met Jonah's gaze and, for the first time, didn't look away. "Tonight," she said, "I'll tell you everything." Jonah nodded, relief and dread warring inside him. As she passed him, her hand lingered on his arm, fingers curling slightly, as if drawing strength from the contact. In that moment, Jonah knew 2 things with painful clarity. He was falling in love with his wife. And whatever she was carrying inside her was about to change both their lives forever. The night Mary promised answers, the wind came down off the plains harder than Jonah had ever heard it, rattling the windows and pressing against the house as if trying to get inside. Supper sat untouched between them, the smell of beans and salt pork hanging heavy in the air. Mary's hands trembled when she finally set her spoon down. Jonah waited, his chest tight, afraid that if he spoke he might break whatever fragile resolve she had gathered. She stood and walked to the window, staring out toward the dark stretch of land that sloped away toward the North Cemetery. "My name isn't Mary Caldwell," she said at last, her voice barely louder than the wind. Jonah felt the words settle into him slowly. "It used to be Mary Boone." The name rang through him like a struck bell. He had heard it as a boy, whispered by grown folks when they thought children weren't listening. A girl gone missing. A body never found. A story that never quite made sense. Mary turned back to him, eyes shining but dry. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I was taken." She told him then about the summer she vanished, about being 9 years old and wandering down to Cottonwood Creek with her younger sister, Abigail. Their father had been drinking again, their mother exhausted, and the water had seemed like freedom on a hot afternoon. Mary's voice remained steady as she spoke, but her hands clenched in the fabric of her skirt. A man had come riding out of the trees, smiling, calling her name like he knew her. She remembered the smell of leather and tobacco, the way he lifted her onto the saddle. Abigail had screamed. Mary had twisted around just in time to see her sister fall, her head striking a rock near the water's edge. The man rode on, not stopping, not looking back. "I didn't know she was dead," Mary said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I thought she'd get up. I thought she'd run home." The man had taken Mary far from Cottonwood Ridge, to a ranch she didn't recognize, where she stayed hidden for weeks. He told her lies, said her family had sent him, said she'd be punished if she tried to leave. Eventually, he delivered her to Samuel Caldwell. Jonah stiffened at the name. Mary nodded grimly. "My uncle wasn't always my uncle," she said. "He was my mother's cousin. He paid the man. I didn't know why at the time. I didn't know until years later." Samuel had given her a new name, a new story. He had told her she was lucky to be alive, that her family was better off without her. When she grew old enough to understand what had happened, it was too late. The town believed Mary Boone was dead. Abigail Boone was buried in a grave marked with Mary's name. "If I spoke," Mary said softly, "Samuel reminded me what he could take from me." Jonah listened, his heart aching with every word. Anger burned in him, hot and sharp, but beneath it was something else, something protective and fierce. He rose from his chair and crossed the room, stopping just short of touching her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. Mary looked at him then, really looked, and something in her face softened. "That's why I locked the door," she said. "Not because of you. Because the nights bring it back. Because I hear her sometimes." Jonah swallowed. "Hear who?" Mary's gaze drifted toward the bedroom. "Abigail," she said. "She knocks." That night, Jonah didn't sleep. He sat beside Mary on the bed, not touching, just close enough to feel her warmth. When the knocking came, faint and hollow, he heard it too. 3 taps, like a child's careful hand against wood. Mary's breath hitched, but she didn't cry. Jonah reached for her then, his fingers curling gently around hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. In that quiet, something shifted between them. The fear didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip, replaced by the fragile beginning of trust. When dawn broke, Mary was still holding his hand. Word began to spread through Cottonwood Ridge in the days that followed. Sheriff Hale came by under the pretense of checking property lines, his questions careful but pointed. Mrs. Harper watched Mary more closely, her eyes softening with recognition. One afternoon, as Mary stood at the counter counting out coins, the older woman reached across and squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Mary looked up, startled. "For what?" Mrs. Harper swallowed. "For not asking harder questions back then." Mary nodded once, her throat too tight for words. Jonah's feelings deepened in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself watching Mary when she didn't know it, noticing the strength in her posture, the quiet determination in her eyes. He admired the way she faced her past not with bitterness, but with a resolve that frightened and inspired him in equal measure. One evening, after a long day mending fence, he came back to the house to find Mary sitting on the porch, her hair loose around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him, a small, genuine smile that warmed him more than the setting sun. Without thinking, he sat beside her. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. When she rested her head against his arm, Jonah knew there was no turning back from what he felt. Samuel Caldwell arrived unannounced a week later, his presence darkening the air like a storm cloud. He dismounted with a practiced ease, his smile sharp. "Niece," he said, kissing Mary's cheek. She stiffened but didn't pull away. Jonah stood his ground, meeting Samuel's gaze. Over supper, Samuel spoke lightly of business, of cattle prices and land deals, but his eyes kept flicking to Mary. Later, when Jonah stepped outside to tend to a horse, Samuel followed. "You seem happy," Samuel said mildly. Jonah didn't answer. "My niece carries burdens," Samuel continued. "Best not to dig too deeply into them." Jonah turned, anger flashing. "She's my wife," he said. "Whatever burdens she has, they're mine too." Samuel's smile thinned. "Careful," he said. "Some graves are better left undisturbed." That night, the knocking came louder than ever. Jonah bolted upright, heart pounding. Mary was already awake, her face pale. The taps echoed through the house, not just at the bedroom door now, but at the walls, the windows, as if the sound were moving. Jonah grabbed the lantern and stood. "I'm done waiting," he said. Mary caught his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." Jonah looked at her, saw the fear there, but also something else. "Hope." He nodded, set the lantern down, and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, her body shaking, and for the first time since they'd married, he held her without hesitation. The knocking faded slowly, reluctantly, like a child being called away. In the days that followed, Jonah began asking questions around town. Carefully, quietly. He spoke to Thomas Reed, to Mrs. Haynes the midwife, to anyone old enough to remember the summer Mary Boone vanished. Pieces began to fit together, forming a picture as ugly as it was inevitable. The man who'd taken Mary had been found dead years later, his body dumped in a ravine miles away. No one had looked too hard into it. Samuel Caldwell had risen in prominence shortly after, his wealth inexplicably expanding. When Jonah mentioned Abigail Boone, faces went still. "That grave never sat right," Mrs. Haynes said softly. "Child fell near the creek," they said. But the bruises didn't match. Mary watched Jonah change as the truth came closer to the surface. The gentleman she had married grew sharper, more focused, but never cruel. He still brought her flowers. Still listened when she spoke. One night, as they lay side by side fully clothed, she turned to him. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You could walk away." Jonah shook his head. "I won't," he said simply. "I love you." The words hung between them, terrifying and beautiful. Mary's breath caught. She reached up, cupping his face, and kissed him. It was tentative at first, then deeper, full of years of restrained longing. For that moment, the past loosened its hold, replaced by something bright and fierce. But Samuel Caldwell was not a man who surrendered control easily. The next morning, Jonah found hoofprints near the North Cemetery, fresh and deliberate. That afternoon, Samuel rode into town again, this time with Sheriff Hale at his side. "We need to talk," Samuel said, his voice smooth. Jonah met Mary's gaze, saw the fear there, and squeezed her hand. Whatever came next, he knew there would be no going back. Samuel Caldwell didn't waste time on pleasantries when he returned with Sheriff Hale. He dismounted stiffly, dust clinging to his coat, and glanced once toward the North Hills before fixing his attention on Jonah. "There are questions being asked," he said evenly. "Questions that don't need answers." Sheriff Hale shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Jonah felt Mary's hand slide into his, her grip firm despite the tension running through her. "Truth has a way of surfacing," Jonah replied. "No matter how deep it's buried." Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Be careful, son," he said. "You've been given a great deal. It would be a shame to lose it." That night, the wind fell silent, leaving the house wrapped in an unnatural stillness. Jonah lay awake beside Mary, her breathing shallow, her body tense as a drawn wire. The knocking began just after midnight, not at the door this time, but beneath them. A hollow thud rose through the floorboards, followed by a scraping sound that made Jonah's skin prickle. Mary sat up abruptly, her face drained of color. "She's closer," she whispered. Jonah swung his legs off the bed and pressed his ear to the floor. The sound came again, 3 slow knocks, muffled, desperate. He straightened, heart pounding. "Tomorrow," he said firmly, "we go to the cemetery. We end this." Dawn found them riding north, the air sharp and cold. The cemetery lay quiet, its crooked markers casting long shadows across the ground. Mary dismounted slowly, her eyes fixed on one particular grave, the marker weathered and wrong. Jonah knelt, brushing dirt away from the name carved into the wood. Mary Boone. His chest tightened. This was where Abigail lay, buried under her sister's name, while the world believed Mary had vanished. Jonah looked up at Mary. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. "She deserves to be known," she said. "And I deserve to stop running." They worked with borrowed shovels, the earth stubborn and cold. Each scrape of metal against dirt felt like a violation and a release all at once. As they dug, memories poured out of Mary in broken fragments. Her sister's laugh, the feel of her small hand slipping from hers at the creek, the guilt that had haunted every year since. Jonah listened, his hands blistering, his heart breaking open wider with every word. When the shovel struck wood, Mary sobbed openly, collapsing to her knees. Jonah set the shovel aside and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she shook. "I'm here," he murmured. "You're not alone anymore." They pried the coffin open just as footsteps approached. Jonah looked up to see Samuel Caldwell standing at the edge of the grave, Sheriff Hale beside him, their faces grim. "This is a mistake," Samuel said sharply. "You don't know what you're doing." Jonah rose slowly, placing himself between Samuel and Mary. "We know enough," he said. Sheriff Hale peered into the grave, his expression darkening as he took in the small bones inside, the unmistakable size of a child. He swallowed hard. "That's not Mary Boone," he said quietly. Samuel's composure cracked then, his eyes flashing with fury. "You ungrateful little—" He stopped short as Hale stepped forward, hand resting on his gun. The truth spilled out under the weight of that moment. Samuel admitted to paying the man to take Mary, not to harm her, he insisted, but to remove her. Abigail's death had been an accident, a complication he hadn't foreseen. When Mary hadn't died as expected, he saw an opportunity to reshape her, to control her, to ensure his secret stayed buried. "Everything I did was to protect the family," he said weakly. Mary stood, her grief hardening into resolve. "You destroyed it," she said. "And you destroyed me." Sheriff Hale placed Samuel under arrest, his face pale. "You'll answer for this," he said. "All of it." Word spread through Cottonwood Ridge like wildfire. Folks gathered at the cemetery, whispers giving way to stunned silence as the truth became undeniable. Mrs. Haynes wept openly. Thomas Reed removed his hat. The empty coffin from years ago was finally understood for what it was, a lie meant to soothe the town too willing to accept easy answers. Abigail Boone was reburied that afternoon under her own name, the marker simple but true. Mary stood beside Jonah as the earth was laid to rest, her hand steady in his. When it was done, she felt something ease inside her, a weight she'd carried for decades finally set down. The nights changed after that. The knocking stopped. The house grew quieter, warmer. Mary slept through the dark hours for the first time since Jonah had known her, her breathing deep and even. Jonah watched her sometimes, marveling at the strength it had taken to survive, to speak, to face the truth. Their love grew in the spaces left behind by fear, filling the house with small, tender moments, shared laughter, whispered conversations, kisses that lingered longer each time. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mary traced the scar on Jonah's hand and smiled softly. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. Jonah leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "Neither did I," he replied. "But I'm grateful every day." Samuel Caldwell was tried and sentenced months later, his influence finally stripped away. Cottonwood Ridge changed in subtle ways, the past no longer a shadow but a lesson. Jonah's ranch thrived with honest work and a little luck, the land seeming to breathe easier now that the truth had been unearthed. Mary found her place in the town, no longer an outsider or a ghost, but a woman known for her quiet strength and kindness. Sometimes she visited Abigail's grave, leaving wildflowers and speaking softly, not in sorrow but in remembrance. On the anniversary of their wedding, Jonah and Mary stood on the porch watching the sun dip below the plains, the sky painted in gold and rose. Jonah slipped his arm around her, pulling her close. "No more locked doors," he said gently. Mary smiled, resting her head against his chest. "No more," she agreed. The wind moved through the grass like a whispered promise, and for the first time in a very long while, the night held nothing to fear, only the steady, enduring warmth of a love that had survived the dark and come out stronger on the other side.